I see a new background, Mayor Beamish. No sound.
Yeah, I say I'm not at the office today, so a new background.
Yeah.
Home. Yeah.
Are we good to go, corporate officer?
Yes, we are.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome everyone to the first Planning and Development Committee meeting for the new year, January 12th, 2021. I'm calling the meeting to order at 3 o'clock. We have an agenda before us. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda we should be aware of? No? That being the case, I would ask for a recommendation to approve the agenda as presented. Mayor Beamish, Councillor Dandretti, thank you. That brings us to our first report from Ms. Rockins. It's for a development permit and character for a garden suite at 313 Headlands Road. And I'll turn it over to Ms. Rockins.
Great. Thank you, Chair. I'll just share my screen. All going well. Good. Sorry, I just have my notes covered by your faces. I'll move you over. Yeah, so this application considers the form and character of a garden suite at 313 Headlands Road. And this address might be somewhat familiar as the property neighbors 317 Headlands, for which a garden suite was recently approved. Development of garden suites requires a form and character development permit under Development Permit Area 8. And the staff report has outlined staff's review of the proposal in detail in relation to those guidelines. In this presentation, I'll share with you the garden suite plans and a brief overview of the proposal, or at least I've tried to keep it brief. There we go. The property shown here in blue is located in the Bay Area, with the principal dwelling fronting on Headlands Road and accessed via Headlands Road, and the garden suite shown by a star proposed to be accessed from Wells Lane. The garden suite is proposed as a permanent residence for the son of the property owner, and the owner and resident of the principal dwelling, Erica Gatz, is planning to be here with us today. Hopefully she pops up at some point to answer any questions from the committee. This perspective image shows the suite as seen from Wells Lane. An existing cedar hedge at the property line that's not shown in the picture will screen the rear side of the suite from the lane. And to preserve the privacy hedge, the front door and covered porch are oriented to the side yard and provide a welcoming entrance from the lane as approached via the driveway access. In keeping with zoning bylaw requirements, the building has a floor area of just under 90 square meters or 960 square feet and has a reduced upper floor having an area of 65% of the lower. The upper floor living areas are nestled into the roof pitch, which is broken with dormer details. Siding materials are durable wood-look hardy board in a soft blue color and with white trim and post details. The roof is planned to be finished with gray asphalt shingles. So as shown in the site plan, the garden suite is centered on the lot in relation to the side lot lines, minimizing overlook and shadowing concerns for neighboring properties. The siting was also chosen to retain the majority of the existing mature vegetation on the property, including fruit trees, food and ornamental garden plantings, and the existing cedar hedge along the lane. A driveway access from the lane will be upgraded to provide 2 tandem permeable parking spaces for the use of the suite. 1 on-site space is required for the use of the garden suite. A new wooden fence and raspberry hedge are planned to define the garden suite's outdoor space to the project east, while new native shrub plantings will buffer the parking area and patio from the neighboring property to the south. 2 new feature trees are proposed at either end of the driveway, providing additional landscape screening for the outdoor and indoor living spaces. And these are proposed to be Japanese maple and/or Japanese maple and fir I believe. Spruce. The southwest side of the suite features the front porch and main entrance, which face the driveway and the rear property at 309 Headlands Road. A black huckleberry hedge bordering the driveway at the fence line provides a buffer to the neighboring lot. This is a planned new hedge. The small upstairs windows on the southwest side provide light to the 2 upstairs bedrooms. These are located in the bedroom at the periphery of the living space to maximize privacy. The northeast side of the garden suite faces the proposed garden suite at 317 Headlands Road, and the minimal upper story windows provide light to the stairwell and hallway. The southeast side of the suite faces into the property and garden of the principal dwelling, and this view would also be that seen by the uphill neighbors from the neighbors of the principal dwelling. The front porch, as shown to the left, wraps around this side of the building, providing the residents an outdoor patio space to be accessed by sliding doors from the living room. And the smaller lower floor windows belong to a ground floor bedroom. The garden suite patio and yard space is defined and buffered from view by a raspberry hedge and a fence along the driveway at least. And the proposed Japanese maple at the end of the driveway, in addition to the existing landscape materials that are between the suite and the house and in the neighboring yards. The upstairs windows belong to an office/bedroom on the left and a bathroom on the right. And the applicant intends to mitigate privacy concerns that were raised by staff around these windows with a privacy film treatment to the panes and with interior window coverings. Last but not least, the northwest side of the suite is that facing Wells Lane. And as the suite will be tucked behind an existing cedar hedge on the lane, design features on the lower floor are minimal, with the front porch and door visually connected to the lane via the driveway, as I mentioned. The lower floor window on the lane side is attached to the kitchen, and the upper story windows provide light to a bedroom and to the stairwell. Staff's review of the zoning bylaw requirements find that the garden suite conforms with all of the requirements of the bylaw, and thus the applicant is not seeking any variances. As noted in the report, parking for the principal dwelling is non-conforming on account of a steep grade differential preventing driveway development off of Headlands Road. On-street pull-out parking serves a number of the residences along Headlands, including the subject property. This situation meets the modest parking needs of the current occupant who has one small vehicle and is the only occupant of the home. And there don't seem to be any known conflicts with the public for the use of these spaces. Therefore, staff suggests that requiring the installation of additional parking for the principal dwelling at this time would be redundant and lead to an unnecessary loss of green space and a loss of screening provided around the garden suite. So to ensure that any additional future parking needs are still met, staff have recommended that a covenant be registered to the property title, allowing the town to require a second culvert and parking access from Wells Lane should there be an increased need in the future. Staff reviewed the proposal in relation to the form and character guidelines for garden suites, and this review is provided at the beginning, or begins on page 4 of the report. Staff found that the proposal substantially addressed all 23 form and character guidelines. In response to staff comments, the applicant has made a planting substitution to include native shrub plantings in the plan, and concern about privacy from the bedroom windows on the upper level of the dwelling, specifically facing the uphill homes, was addressed with plans to use privacy film and indoor window coverings, as I mentioned. Staff concludes that the proposal conforms with the design guidelines for garden suites and that the siting and design are well considered within the neighborhood context. The plans were referred to the Squamish Nation, the fire department, and the town's building and infrastructure departments. The fire and building departments reported no concerns, while infrastructure noted some upgrades required on the lane. And staff recommendations are included on page 1 of the report. These include that the development permit be issued as proposed, with the condition that a covenant be registered to the property to secure the additional parking should it be needed. And thank you very much. I'll give you back the screen to discuss. And once again, mention that any questions for the applicant can be directed to Erica if she's If she's present, we'll have to find out.
Thank you, Ms. Watkins. I noticed that the Erica Gatz has now joined us. Thanks for the report. Any questions? And I would sort of initially seek comment or feedback from Mr. Keck or Mr. Sutton to start off, if they have any comments.
Sure, I don't mind going first then.
Thank you.
I looked through these plans last night and I really like it. I think it looks like a cute little laneway house. I think the roof lines in particular are appealing with those little dormers. I think the town's already noted recommendations are good. I can't think of a thing to add to this. I mean, I'm always on about more maybe environmental features or something like that, but obviously we don't really require that. So I think this town needs more of exactly this sort of thing. So I like it.
Great. Mr. Keck?
Thank you. Yes, I agree with Cliff. More, please, more housing for everyone. One thing I would recommend is maybe considering some skylights, because they add way more light than just a kind of a vertical window. So that might be nice for the stairwell kind of space upstairs. One skylight over that stairwell would, I think, make a big difference. So just something to consider. That's all.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from council? Mayor Beamish. You're muted, sir.
I congratulate the applicant on a very well planned out project, and it serves exactly the purpose, I think, for laneway housing, to expand housing for family members or for rentals, and I think it's excellent. So I would first of all move the report so to be received.
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. Yes, sorry about that. I'd like to move that the report as presented be received. Councillor D'Andretti, Mayor Beamish, thank you. All in favor?
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
It's all right. No, and I think it's, as I say, an excellent project. And I hope to see it proceed.
I took a drive by the area, and you know, I think it's going to fit well into the area because of the topography. Sort of a raised street on headlands. You know, it doesn't become a sort of an invasive addition to the area, and I'm just wondering if Mrs. Gatz has anything that she would like to add at this point. You are still muted, Mrs. Gatz.
Okay, is that better?
That's much better. Thank you.
Oh, for heaven's sakes. No, I'm just fine with it the way it is. Yeah, it's all good.
And I think the staff have addressed the potential long-range parking issue. So with the covenant in place, that I think, you know, all the bases have been covered, and it's going to be a great addition to the
Okay.
that area of the community. Any other comment or concerns? Councillor D'Andretti?
Yeah, I just want perhaps feedback from staff. Just hypothetically, if we have 20 homeowners that come with this sort of request, so what happens with the administration of all these covenants? It's just a future concern, right? I mean, this is only one, but obviously it opens the precedent. So I just want to understand in terms of staff, not only staff administrating, but dealing with future concerns, not with this particular property, but I'm saying just if this escalates and everybody comes to town with such request.
Yeah, that's a good question, and one that definitely crossed our minds. In reviewing the garden suites bylaw, there is an opportunity to look at some unique situations in town that are known in terms of parking specifically. We have looked at other jurisdictions where, for example, in Nelson, there is a provision for homes that have a grandfathered and functioning parking situation. So that'll come back to council in terms of a recommendation, but it could be addressed at a multiple property level for specific areas, or with a policy to address that situation. If that were to happen in future, then this covenant could be removed at any time with permission from the town or with a signature from the town.
Just for clarification, though, a covenant when it is placed on a property is registered on title. So even if the property sold, a future owner of that property would still be bound by that covenant because it is registered on title with land titles.
That's correct. And it could only be removed with permit. We would be a co-signer with the property owner. So to have it removed with the town's permission, it could be removed for a future owner. And that's precisely why we would suggest the covenant. In case it changed hands, then that requirement is registered for a future owner.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Dandretti?
Yes, in terms of administrative possible issues, and what about compliance? I mean, would the town would be able, if again, just a scenario that 20, 30 people decide to do that, and so how is it, with bylaw officers and with people parking off street, but how do people know, that just trying to understand the future, right?
Ms. Stats?
So the covenant is in place as sort of a backup enforcement tool. So if this is approved without that, then the main dwelling remains in a non-conforming status without sufficient on-site parking. So if there is a complaint, we could pull the property title, and with the covenants registered on title, we would see that there is an agreement in place where the property owner must install the sufficient on-site parking. So it gives the town a greater authority to enforce, essentially.
Thank you for that. I noticed in Ms. Rockin's report that the parking area is designated as permeable, which I think in that area is important. I would assume that the additional parking spot would also be required to be permeable.
Yes, that is in the form and character guidelines, but if we wanted it specifically in the covenant, we could do that also.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Alrighty. That being the case, I would like to move that the recommendations on page 5 of the agenda, that a development permit for form and character for garden suite at 313 Headlands Road be received, and that the development committee recommends that the development permit DP 2020-23 be issued subject to the registration of section 219 covenant to ensure that future parking needs may be met at the town's request of the town through the provisions of an additional parking space on the site. Would someone move that? Thank you, Councillor Ladwig. Second, Mayor Beamish, thank you. All in favor?
Okay.
Thank you. That brings us to the next item on the agenda, 3.2, Director of Planning. I believe Planning Director Stats is delivering this report.
Is presenting the Housing Needs Report Implementation Framework. So in October, Staff presented council with the housing needs report, which was prepared by Urban Matters for the town of Gibsons, the District of Sechelt, and the Sunshine Coast Regional District. And upon endorsement of that report, council directed staff to provide policy options on how to address the housing needs. So the housing needs report identified the who and the what, so the data behind housing. And what was asked for is, well, what are we going to do about it, and how can we do something about it? So the housing needs report implementation framework presents best practices and policy recommendations for each local government. What I did in the staff report is pulled out the recommendations specific to the town of Gibsons. So this is just a summary of what we know from the housing needs report. So this is the data that was collected. What we know in terms of demographics is that population is growing and aging. Smaller households are becoming more common. We know that in terms of the housing stock, the single detached home is the most common type of housing on the coast and is unaffordable for a median earning household. In terms of affordability, between 2016 and 2019, median incomes increased by approximately 11%. And over that same period, the average sales price for a detached dwelling increased by 53%. Single income households are likely priced out of ownership options. The cost of rent has increased. In 2016, 40% or more of all renter households were living in unaffordable housing. And in 2016, there were approximately 1,175 renter households and 860 owner households in core housing need across the Sunshine Coast. And core housing need are households that are currently living in unacceptable conditions, so overcrowded housing or housing in need of repairs, and they cannot afford an acceptable alternative housing unit in their community based on median rents. So that's what was defined in the housing needs report. And then in terms of our vulnerable population and vulnerable groups, homelessness is increasing on the Sunshine Coast. So in 2018, the homeless count counted 57 people experiencing homelessness. And then in 2020, we just received the count, which identified 84 people as experiencing homelessness. So the key themes from the housing needs report are that affordability is a significant issue and is impacting the local workforce. The engagement suggested that there is a high demand for rental housing, which is not being met by the current supply of rental options. There are limited housing options for people with physical activity limitations or mental health challenges. As the population continues to age, there will be increased need for more affordable, smaller units in accessible housing forms. Across the coast, although most housing is in the form of single family homes, the community engagement suggested that there is a need for affordable options for families, so 3 or more bedroom units. And then, of course, homelessness and hidden homelessness are becoming more of a challenge. So this slide here is pulled from the implementation framework report, and it shows opportunities and roles in the housing system. So it defines different roles and agencies and organizations and what their roles and responsibilities are in the housing system. And every role is important, but we each have, well, many of us have different roles to play. So local governments, for example, we have a role in facilitating development through planning, regulations, and approvals. We have a role in regulating and incentivizing affordable housing, investing in housing and affordable housing, monitoring, researching, and innovating, education and advocacy, and partnerships. That's our role. And then other agencies have roles in building affordable housing, operating affordable housing, and then operating support services. So this is a neat slide that just has a visual representation of all the different organizations and agencies, from local governments to nonprofits to builders to different levels of government. We all have a different role to play, and it just, the report outlines what the local government role is and essentially what the town's role can be. So this is a high level summary slide of what the town's role could be, local government's role is, and opportunities for local governments to support the housing system. And the report identifies 4 categories or 4 approaches to supporting the housing system. So one is through facilitating development through plans, regulations, and approvals. And this could be done through density bonusing, inclusionary zoning, housing agreements, infill development, pre-zoning, secondary suites, and garden suites. So essentially, density bonusing is identifying a base density for a zone and then adding density for a specific housing type or housing unit. So the live work zone we implemented in Gibsons in 2018 has a base density of 3 units, and then there's a bonus density that says added density can be up to a maximum floor space ratio, with the condition that all those units must be for rental housing only. We introduced in the new mixed use gateway zone a base density. I think it might be 3 as well, I can't remember, but there was a base density, and then the added density was based on an economic analysis to negotiate community amenity contributions. And that's how we can integrate affordable housing into that process. Inclusionary zoning is another tool to look at. We haven't done that in Gibsons, but it would be basically typically used for outside municipal cores. And we don't have a lot of land like that, but it could be for subdivision of land, saying for each unit that is subdivided, $1,000 must be contributed to the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund. Housing agreements secure affordable housing. Infill development, we're doing that through our Garden Suite program right now. And we did it through the Davis Road, Poplar Lane rezoning, so we could add to that. And pre-zoning is looking at specific areas where we would like to zone for a shovel-ready project. So look at areas we could look at pre-zoning for infill. We could look at identifying areas that would be suitable for supported housing or seniors housing or housing for a specific group. And then secondary suites and garden suites. So secondary suites, we've recently changed our bylaw to allow secondary suites in more housing types, and we are currently reviewing our garden suites policy. So a lot of the work in terms of facilitating development is a best practice, and the town is working towards that already. But there are pieces of it that we haven't included. So this could be an approach to do that. In terms of investing and incentivizing desired unit types, this could be incentivizing secondary suites, garden suites, formalizing contributions to the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund, and considering a regional housing service. So incentivizing can be done in a number of different ways through subsidies or through bringing an application ahead of another one. In terms of processing times and processing development applications, we can jump the queue for specific applications. And we're looking at reducing costs for garden suites, for example, through our review of that process. In terms of formalizing contributions to the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund, we are updating our community amenity contribution policy to hopefully have a more clear contribution. And we could also look at establishing regular, like annual contributions if that's what council wants to do. And then in terms of a regional housing service, that would be through the regional district, the Sunshine Coast Regional District, establishing a service for affordable housing and regular contributions to that service. So that's a bigger conversation, part of a partnership as well. Convening partnerships, advocating for housing needs and educating communities. So what the town has been doing for that is partnerships with BC Housing and the Sunshine Coast Affordable Housing Society, even with Rain City Housing, if we can support their work for a shelter or supported housing, and then advocating to senior levels of government for more support services. And then in terms of social equity, using a social equity lens when creating policy. So making sure policy is fair and equal and could apply that lens. So the next few slides here, and I'll ask the chair if you want me to go through this. I have 3 slides that go through the recommendations in the staff report and in the housing implementation framework report. And this is basically the table that came out of the staff report. So I can go through each of those if this committee would like that, or I can leave it open for discussion. So I'll pass it over to you, Chair.
Maybe what we could do is discuss, because what you've presented here in these slides is what's on page 22 to 24 of the report. So maybe hopefully everyone's had a chance to have a look at what's there. What I would perhaps like to do is leave these for discussion, if that's agreeable with everyone.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. So
okay.
I'll skip these, but we can always come back to them if a question comes up. In terms of next steps, so what the recommendation is here is to take those recommendations from the implementation framework and adopt them as basically a housing strategy for the town. So should council endorse those recommendations as a housing strategy, then the next step would be to provide direction on prioritizing those actions. There's a number of different ways to implement them. But what we could do is council would prioritize it, and then staff could report back on the feasibility, so the financial implications and other implications of the action as identified. So the staff recommendation is for council to receive the report and then endorse, subject to future budget constraints, the recommendations in the housing needs implementation framework as a town's affordable housing strategy or housing strategy under those following categories. So that's it, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much for that report. I would like to make a motion that the report as presented be received. Councillor Ludwig, Mayor Beamish, thank you. All in favor? Great. Questions? Councillor D'Andrade?
Thank you. I think it's more like not necessarily a question, but it's just perhaps a suggestion, because obviously we know about the housing crisis since 2007. We haven't even, this year we will have a census, and until we get the results, we will know that the situation will get worse. We can expect that. So what I think the implementation framework is great. The society has done, the Sunshine Coast Affordable Housing Society has done a great job. But I think what will help direct council, it's really about the resources needed to implement each policy versus the impacts. For example, there would be policies, for example, incentivizing with DCCs and things like not charging DCCs. I'm sure it's going to impact the town. So, I mean, it's a great policy. theoretically, but I don't know the viability, the feasibility in like implementing large scale. Another idea, and please nobody gets offended, I'm just going to throw there because it's an easy example. We can say short-term housing will be banned from the town of Gibsons, and we're going to have a pool of maybe 50, 60 immediate housing that would serve 120 people just from the onset, and it would generate a great economic impact, especially for the workforce housing and things like that. So to me, I think it would help if staff could develop all these recommendations in a sort of a matrix where when it comes back to council, it can help us direct, because it's very hard to direct just based on feelings, ideas of maybe opinions without necessarily analyzing the extent of the impact. I think at the end of the day, it will be what can we do and what we're gonna get with each policy. So that would be my recommendation if possible.
Okay. Councillor Ludwig?
Please respond to Councillor DeAndrade if you'd like.
Okay, I think there's a lot of things you were covering there. One of the big things that looking at this and the mass of it is the capacity of staff to handle it. And what I'm almost wondering if under funding that's been made available through COVID relief, and a lot of, we know the housing situation has been here for a while, but it's certainly been exacerbated by the last year of the pandemic, and people suddenly, what was the quiet little seaside community suddenly become the place to go. And people, December real estate sales on the Sunshine Coast were up 81% over the previous year. So it's sort of like, wait a minute, what's happening here? So I'm wondering if there is a potential through COVID relief funding to direct some resources to coming up with a plan based on this report. And I would question that of staff if they've had an opportunity to possibly consider that.
So I can answer that, Chair. I mean, in a vague kind of way, because there are so many recommendations, and it really depends on how we implement a piece of it. So the COVID money can be used to provide services for vulnerable persons. So we'd have to categorize it we'd have to do a project that falls under that category. And then it says other related costs. So we would have to look at what project we'd like to take on and apply for that under the funding. I mean, so there may be opportunity under the funding, but it depends on the project.
Well, sort of a double-edged sword, because one, if it doesn't fit exactly under the COVID things, is there possibly a way of, I'm just looking at, the load on staff, and with us meeting virtually, we don't get to watch the Gantt chart on the council chamber wall. But if there was a way, either with projects that you're doing that are COVID related, that hours could be freed up and funds could be freed up to sort of fine tune and develop what you've presented in this report, that, we can address some of these issues. CAO?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just further to what Leslie-Ann was mentioning, I think we're not, there's a step perhaps missing in this conversation, which is the prioritization. Like, there's somewhat related to that workload, is it even for staff, for us to go back and prepare a report on the implications and the costs more so than the results. Then I think we still need to work through first, sort of, does this in general, fit with councils? And I know Councilor Ludwig has mentioned that before, in terms of needing a wider strategy document. I think we'd like to sort of ideally work with you to sort of pin that down a bit so that we know what that have. I think the next step is that the prioritization, not just the next 2 years, but sort of setting the work going forward, because it will take us a few years to implement. And I think at that, so after we sort of accepting that, when we come back, we'll come back with more information around the implications, the cost, and the staff, because some areas it would be simply a matter of contracting out the work, and others we might need to bring somebody in on a temporary basis, but I don't think we would be ready for. There's a report coming next week from the Director of Finance on the COVID funds, and I think part of that provides another opportunity to sort of talk about what some of those funds, the town's own contribution towards COVID impacts can be as well, including housing, of course.
Okay.
I don't know if that added a bit more clarity. I hope so.
Councillor Ludwig, you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Simply put, I do support the recommendations that are being put forward in principle. I think for me, like just looking at how the recommendations are written, what I'd love to see is in the table that staff have provided, I guess it's table 1 in the report, with the summarization of the different recommendations that are coming out of the implementation plan. And I don't mean to be too prescriptive because I'm on staff, but this is just the way my brain works. It would be great if for each recommendation, there's then the current practice column. If we could then have examples for Gibsons kind of column, along with a staff with prioritization, like this would be, if there's 10 priorities there, if you want to number them, or like what do you guys think is the priority, and that kind of gives us a timeline to think about when these things would be worked on and into how far, like a timeline kind of thing. And the reason I say this is because I notice, like for example, number 10, consider introducing an incentive program to encourage homeowners to rent secondary suites or occupied dwellings to local workers at affordable rates. I wholeheartedly agree with that recommendation, but I'd love to see a bit more detail on, well, what are we thinking? What does that mean? Like in my mind as a landlord, the first thing that comes to mind is I'd love to not have to pay 2 utility bills in one suite if I have 2 rental suites in one property, which I have. That's just an example, but we haven't really delved into options specifically about each recommendation. And I think it would be great if staff could put their minds to that a bit and then let council kind of provide some input into that. So basically I totally like what I'm seeing. I'd love to see that table expanded upon with sort of timelines, prioritization, and specific options to implement those recommendations. And then other than that, yes, conceptually, I do agree with all of these recommendations, but I'm a little hesitant to just say, check, yes, I support them all without having that work done first. So I don't know if we could possibly add a recommendation to what staff are recommending here with, let me just read how it's written, and that council endorses subject to, like maybe this just wording needs to be elaborated a little bit more, saying, at least from my perspective, that council endorses these recommendations subject to future analysis and budget constraints or something, because it's not just about budget, right?
If I may, Mr. Chair, just comment on that. Just the endorsement part is it's important in this context, because you're not agreeing to everything going forward. You're just saying, in the general terms, these are the steps that you agree with, knowing that we're coming back a big subject to right after that. But wording that, fair enough. We agree with what you're saying.
Are staff feeling that from the direction that Councillor Ludwig was suggesting, that we need an amendment to this, or you're getting, because we are going to be moving forward with this and how it interfaces with the strategic plan and one thing and another. Do we need Ms. Stantz?
Thank you, Chair. So I think I hear what you're saying, Councillor Ladwig, and wanting more details about how we can actually implement these considerations and these recommendations. Right now, at this stage, what we're looking for is clear direction from council as a whole on options to consider, on a strategy moving forward. So with council endorsing this as a strategy, then we have considerations in place. So now we can look at those, and if we get an application for, say, Kiwanis, for example, they applied for, or they wanted to apply through BC Housing, and they said, what do you have in terms of a policy or support for this application? And we had the council strat plan and a few policies in our OCP, but not enough to really specifically support their application. With something like this, we could pull out pieces of it to say, this is what council has supported, has endorsed, and therefore we can support this project, or we can look to this when a development application comes in and pull these considerations into a proposal. So it basically unifies council's approach on how council wants to look at your role in the housing system, and will direct staff based on these recommendations. But each consideration and recommendation will require another report that goes to council, will require an analysis, a financial analysis, staff time, enforcement if that's part of it. So there are a lot of pieces that come with each one of these considerations and recommendations.
Follow up, Councillor Ladwig?
So that's great. Thank you, Director of Planning. And that is, it's all helping me, and I am totally supporting what we're doing here. It's great. Just like, for example, what if we, like, under the first heading, which is facilitate development through plans, regulations, and approvals, which I totally wholeheartedly support. Maybe I missed it, but I didn't see an actual line item for the development of the short-term rental bylaw as one of our tools, one of our regulatory tools for support for the affordable housing issue in Gibsons. And I see the Director of Planning shaking her head, and I'm curious why that is, because that is a policy. Is it there? And I just, as a line item?
No, it's not in there. I think it talked about looking at restrictions on short-term rentals.
In one zone.
Expand pre-zoning for infill density to more areas, and with restrictions on short-term rentals. So short-term rentals is a piece of this puzzle. It's the housing piece. And when we were creating the short-term rental bylaw, there was not sufficient data to say that short-term rentals are actually taking away from long-term rentals. We have a lot more information now, and the report that Councillor DeAndrade was speaking about at the last council meeting, we received that report as well, and we're planning on bringing that forward to council. But there's a balance in regulating short-term rentals, and it's the economy versus the affordable housing. So that conversation has to happen with the regulation of short-term rentals, rather than in this table. Another thing to mention about this table is a table in the staff report outlines the recommendations and the current practice. I wouldn't recommend including the current practice in the housing strategy. That's just for information. That's just for you to know what we're doing and to flag that we are doing a lot of it already. But the strategy that I'm recommending adopting would be the table in the implementation framework report.
Does that end?
Well, I didn't compare the table in the staff report to the table in the implementation report line by line. I'm assuming it's more or less cut out. All I'm saying is I do feel that a short-term rental bylaw is a piece of the affordable housing issue. It's not, I still totally support small-term or short-term rentals in our town. It has to be done properly. We're working on that. I recognize that that's an issue that we're trying to iron out right now, but I still see that one of my drivers for, for supporting the development of a short-term rental bylaw is because I do believe that that it does impact the long-term rental housing availability. And so to what degree, we don't know, but I do believe that there is a correlation there. And so I do see that as one of the policy tools that we as a community are working on. We haven't gotten there yet, but that is part of our strategy.
If I can interject, table 1 in this report is as extracted out of the housing needs report. And I think at the time we were dealing with the short-term rental and awaiting the arrival of the housing needs report, we were sort of keeping them as separate entities. I think, I think that they work together, but I think personally, I think they should be kept separate because, things are going to change and you don't want to have to re-dredge one thing because of a component of another. So personally, I would prefer to keep the housing needs report and the information that we're proceeding. We're aware of what the implication can be and will be with short-term rentals, but I think they should really be kept separate. But that's just my opinion. Mayor Beamish? You're muted, sir.
Do I have to repeat all that? Thank you for the report, first of all. I appreciate it. I also appreciate seeing the examples from other communities as what is done, what is being done, and what can be done. It's always good to look and see what is possible out there. I think that the strategies, the list of strategies there is important. There are a couple I would add to that. I think that one of our rules has also got to be to lead the conversation in the community. And it's not an advocacy role as much as a leadership role, a consultant role in the community in terms of bringing this issue forward and hearing from the community on it. Short-term rentals, I believe, is a solution to those people who need to get into housing and need to supplement that income to be able to afford that housing. I think that's that entry level and allow them to do that. I totally understand that and I get it. It's not intended, though, to be for someone in Vancouver to buy a house and set up short-term rental. They're not contributing at all to the community in that context. I think that we need to move forward. I think I'd like to look at tiny homes, for example, as another solution. How could that be done? How could that be incorporated in some way? Some municipalities are looking at that as well. And I think there are things. I think we need to be careful. I think we've looked at affordability of housing, and we've looked at everything from the range of talking about homelessness right down to the person who can afford whatever they want and buy whatever they want on the coast. We don't link it to poverty reduction. I think that's got to be at some level. We've also got to say, as another strategy, is increasing the wage, the ability of people to actually afford housing on the Sunshine Coast. And poverty reduction strategies are equally important. And I think we should ignore them and just focus on one part of the solution. Well, we'll make housing cheaper. That does nothing for the person who's not having an increased income to get there, sort of thing. So I think that somehow we've got to look at that whole social picture of saying, okay, and on this side we're doing this, and on this side we're doing this, and and I say, for example, we go
Sorry.
You just went into Martian mode, sir. We didn't understand your last few statements.
Bill?
No, sorry if I can cut in. Mr. Mayor, sometimes if you get too close to your computer screen, the sound goes off, but you're good now.
Push it away. Is that okay? Okay. Yeah, I think there's one of the things we looked at in terms of tenders is we always try to award the bid to the lowest tender. But we don't look into that tender and say, well, what's making it the lowest tender? Is it because they're paying people a minimum wage, whereas the higher tender is actually paying people a livable wage? And do we have a social responsibility to look at that so that people can have a livable wage in our community and do that? It's part of a big picture, I know, and I'm getting awfully far away from housing on that, but I
Well,
think we consider
You're,
some.
you're not, sir, because point number 4 is supporting social equity. And I
Yeah.
think that's what you're discussing there, which is a huge component of what we do for the people that live in this community.
The next step slide you put up there, Director of Planning, is that available again? Easily available? I just thought they were out of order, that's all, in terms of the next steps. Only in the sense that I think it'd be helpful for us to know what the cost of some of those actions are before we prioritize them. Because we could prioritize the most expensive and ignore the low hanging fruit for ourselves and not get something done simply because it didn't meet our priority. But hey, it was very doable, and I thought that I think it was number 3 on your next steps, whereas number 2. So just thinking in that direction is that we should be looking at the cost of some of our actions and saying, well, we can do this, and set some time frame. Anyway, a good report. I appreciate it. And thank you.
Councillor Danvetti?
Yeah, and to add that, I would like to see also the impacts, right? Because it's not only cost, the resource, but the trade-offs, right? So perhaps there are some actions that even they will cost a little bit, but the impacts will be tremendous. And I think this is important for decision making.
Something that I think is really important, and it's referenced in what is within our scope, is partnerships. I think there is an issue of affordable housing for purchase, but the thing that came out that screamed the loudest to me in the housing report was the disparity between owners and renters at whatever level, and the number of people in a rental situation that are living at unacceptable levels. And how do we turn that table? There's not a lot of rental being built. We have the Shaw Road project, which is not moving as fast as perhaps we'd like to see it happening. But I think the critical thing that we need to look at and perhaps prioritize is where partnerships can be created with nonprofits, because that sort of opens all sorts of avenues and venues for financing from other sources. I would suspect that Mr. Keck and Mr. Sutton would affirm that a lot of people are not building affordable rental housing these days. It's more, if they are building rental, it's what the market will bear. But I think the partnership with nonprofits is a critical aspect and it is something within our purview that we're able to perhaps stimulate and encourage and look for opportunities where, we know this group and that group are looking for something, and perhaps partnered, it can come to be. I'll go to Director Stats and then Councillor Ladwig.
Thank you. So one more thing I could mention about prioritizing and the implementation is that when a development proposal comes before us or before a department, or an opportunity comes in front of us, we are always looking at what kind of affordable housing can the town secure in whatever shape or form that looks like. So when those opportunities come before us, we can bring a report forward to council with information about how we could implement it and what the impact would be to the best of our knowledge, and in terms of what type of housing or what the impact would be on that housing group, or the financial impacts as well. So with a strategy endorsed, then we can always have that as a lens to look through for opportunities that we can bring forward.
Councillor Ludwig? No? CAO, you,
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure we sort of capture a little bit of the comments from committee. I note that the short-term rentals is one line item. It could be one line item out of these 20 or 30 actions, and so you see how much time we've spent on that already. And so for us, being realistic, it will take many years to implement all of these actions. We're just noting that. But I do want to talk a little bit about the next steps as far as that. Like, one of the things for the adoption, we're looking for council to say, we like this strategy and these are the sort of as it is. What we need to know is how is this going to be implemented, what are the costs, what are the impacts, the implications, what options we have under each one of these. I'm saying that. One of the benefits of the adoption of the strategy is that we can, as Leslie was mentioning, sort of embedded in staff reports so that we can comment how is this development related to the strategy and what portion of it is it contributing to in terms of embedding that. I think will be very helpful. But in terms of reporting back, the list is not prioritized by any means, neither by cost or timeline or staff capacity. But we want to do that next and bring you back reports subsequently. So looking at, for example, the facilitating development through plans and regulations, where we're at, what has the town been doing, what other options do we have, what are the costs of these options and the impacts, and sort of over the next few months, just further, sort of add substance to this and make it more usable for council and us going forward.
Councillor Ludwig?
So first of all, I just want to apologize. I didn't say thank you for this report either. It is an excellent report. So thank you, Director of Planning. It's great. And yes, CAO, that really was helpful. That's really helpful. I do think that a strategy, so conceptually, again, I support everything that's here, but at the same time, I do, like what Mayor Beamish said, there might be the odd little line that we'd like to see added or policy piece that we'd like to see considered. I do feel strongly that the STR policy should be in there as a line item. I think Mayor Beamish's comment about tiny homes is another interesting one that is out there that hasn't, and I did pick up on that too. It's not really reflected in there. But I also do think timelines and prioritizing the items here is part of a strategy. And that's something so I'm happy to endorse this now, with the understanding that more work is to be done on the development of this strategy. And that does include timelines, prioritization. It can be a 5-year plan. That's totally fine. It can be a 10-year plan. If we identify what we hope to accomplish in year 1, 2, and then I guess it'll be the next council, but you understand what I mean. I do think that identifying priorities and timelines, and perhaps that's just having the odd little kick it, adding the odd little line item policy piece in there would be appreciated.
CAO?
To that end, I think it would be helpful to have, I'm just wondering if it makes sense to have an additional resolution from council that, in essence, sort of that staff bring back implementation reports for each of the identified goals of the strategy, or is that a priority for that, or you think this is sufficient for us to bring that?
Councillor Ludwig, and then Mayor Beamish.
From my perspective, that's more work than I would ask of staff. I don't need a single report on every single line item. I just want your thoughts. I just want another column or two. Just what are your thoughts on how would we implement? What are your thoughts on how we'd incentivize people to build secondary suites for long-term rental? What could we do? And I don't need it well researched, just another column. We could kind of do these 3 bullets. And I would appreciate your thoughts on, is that a priority that we should implement in the next year or 2, or can we put that out to year 5? Like if we put a time bound around this, I think those pieces, when we look at time, capacity, and tools, then we've got a strategy. Otherwise, we've just got a list of items that need to be worked on in perpetuity. God knows,
Okay. Mayor Beamish?
Yeah, I would like to see us tied to an annual report card on how we're doing, so that so we actually live this as a living kind of set of priorities, and we look at it and we say, okay, what have we done? What are we working on? What's coming next, sort of thing. So that whether it's annual or biannual, but I think we need to keep revisiting this and updating it as time goes, because there will be changes and other opportunities.
I agree with Mr. Sutton.
Yeah, I just actually was going to first just agree with Councillor Ladwig, but also with the mayor on this. It seems to me that the priority here is getting a strategy approved and in place so that we can move forward with reviewing some potential proposals and everything. So I'm all in favor of getting something so that we can move forward. If this is in any way a stumbling block, let's remove it. That being said, it seems like this is a living document. If the strategy needs to be revised, redeveloped, changed, I'm all in favor of, continuing to come back to it. And I think the mayor's got the right idea with maybe setting up a regular review of it and see how it's working out. That being said, I'd like to offer one other comment, which was, I think it's a good report, but I think what the report really exposed for me was the inadequacy of our tools here. I mean, I think we're trying to slay a dragon with a steak knife here. I mean, if we were looking at 10, 20 years down the road when the lower mainland in general and the Sunshine Coast is going to have to deal with potentially climate refugees, larger populations, I don't think we are in any way prepared for the number of people who are going to be coming to this area looking for homes, and the affordability of them is just going to be an impossibility, I think. So I was definitely, I think, more keenly aware of the desperate nature of the situation. So yeah, I'd like to move forward and if we can, review this regularly and make sure we're doing a good job, I think that's maybe a good way to tackle it.
I think the director of planning sort of made reference to something. This is a good sort of checklist as just in moving forward as projects are surfaced and come to planning, that if they use the criteria outlined in table 1, and are they ticking the boxes, and the report, keeping record of that sort of generates the report card that perhaps Mayor Beamish is looking for. So, every time a proposal comes up, that, what of these points is it covering? And we see where we're hitting the targets and where we're missing them, and, can adjust from there. So, if staff are willing to use, if we approve this, or that it becomes sort of a report card held against projects as they are brought before planning. CAO?
In that sense, I think that's certainly a good suggestion too. I would like to produce an actual document to have some visibility, similar to a strategic plan, and something you can be proud of as well. And we've got the annual report, which could have its own housing compendium as well, in addition to lots of opportunities to promote this. Yeah, so there's the visibility. I thought it's also important, and the communication of it is sort of a logical next steps as well.
Mayor Beamish?
I think apropos of what Mr. Sutton was saying, that about 20 years ago, maybe even longer, maybe 25 years ago, there was a study done called the Georgia Basin study down out of Vancouver. And it was a study that projected that exactly what's happening is that all of the communities surrounding Vancouver, within reach of Vancouver, will become suburbs of Vancouver. And we're seeing that. And they projected, even including the links over to Nanaimo and the ability of people to move out of the city core and move into these other areas. And we're seeing that happen. Sometimes we work so closely in our own area of Gibsons, broader Sunshine Coast, that we forget that we are actually part of a bigger strategy, and that strategy really is generated not by us, but by the community that we all live near, close to, and that's Vancouver. And the ability of people to move away, Vancouver attracting more and more large-scale business and international business, but people don't have to be in their offices every day. And so that we're seeing that impact, whether it's people on the islands who are employed by Netflix doing high-tech work. They can do it, and they can do it from here. And musicians and different artists and different people working in different areas. We provide a great environment for that to happen. We are successful, but it's costing some people in our community. That success is costing some people.
Okay. Can we sort of move on that the recommendations on page 21 be approved, and that I think staff have probably had received enough sort of comment and feedback from us to have a fairly good grasp of where we're hoping to go with this. I think it's a great report, and when you look at the effort that was put into the housing report, I think some good tools have come out of it, and some of the things we knew, some of the numbers I think were a bit of a shock to us, that as I mentioned earlier, some of the disparity between owners and renters. But I would like to move that the recommendations on page 21 be approved, and that become part of a working project moving forward. Councillor Ludwig? Anyone seconding that?
No, this is where I always get confused with Robert's rules. I would just like to add another and further that, but I don't know if I do that now or if we adopt.
We would have to make an amendment to this, corporate officer.
If the motion has not yet been moved and seconded, anyone's free to move whatever resolution they would like at this point. After it's been moved and seconded is when you have to move, second, and vote on an amendment.
Can I make a suggestion then, Chair?
Okay.
I'd like to add that just because this is our record, and obviously it doesn't capture our whole conversation, I'd like to add and further that staff report back to PDC and council with further municipal specific details on how to implement the action items outlined in these 4 categories, with timelines and prioritizations suggested. Is that possible? I mean, we don't have to. We can move we can have a discussion about what the priorities end up being, but I'd like their thoughts on this isn't a strategy yet. This isn't what is it? Is it a 5-year strategy? Is it a one? Come back to us with a strategy. These are line items that are great. These are action items, but it's not a strategy. Come back to us with your thoughts on how long you think it'll give us a plan. This is sorry.
Councillor Betty?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think in order to define what is the best strategy, we have to understand the impact of each policy, have some sort of prediction, even though it's not going to be carved in stone, but we need to have a sense, okay, if we implement this legislation based on past numbers, how much can we advance? And based on cost, obviously, but also the impact. So I think that's why I was saying at the beginning that it would be nice to have also some elements of what are the impacts, because it's very hard to make decisions without further understanding this regard, right? We can prioritize something that is easy, but in 5 years, we won't see too much happening. A good example was the affordable housing policy that actually we're still working on that with the community amenity contribution, which since the policy was issued, it has been 13 years, and we're still working on the buildings, right? We have not have any of them completed. So this is not to say anything bad about the process, but we need to be realistic. And if we don't understand the impact, it becomes more, okay, we're going to do this because it's easy. We can even assume, okay, we're going to do this specific because it's very easy. We don't have an idea of the impact, but we're going to implement anyways. But it would be important to have, because when I look at back, what I have is there has been 13 years of a policy that by the time the Shaw Road gets built, that's the number that we're going to attain. So that's the reality. And I think it's important to consider that.
I think you're making a point there, but it's director status.
Me now? Okay. I just had a suggestion for tweaking the recommendation a little bit. So rather than saying endorsing the recommendations as the town's housing strategy, it could say endorsing the recommendations as the basis for the town's housing strategy. And further that staff report back with additional details on how to prioritize and implement the actions with timelines. Then we have a basis that council at least agrees on, and we can report back with more details on how to prioritize it and a timeline.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
okay.
Can we move that as amended? Mayor Beamish, Councillor Ledwig, thank you. All in favor? Any further discussion? I think, from the nature of this, it is, and, not wanting to put handcuffs on staff and get them painted into a corner. I think, guidelines are great, but we don't want them cast in stone to the point that people can't move. So I think currently with the amendment, it gives a guideline and some direction to that we can do some positive things moving forward. I sort of like some of the points that it's covered, particularly as Mayor Beamish referenced earlier, the social equity component, because I just posted something the other day on social media that we're in a crazy situation right now, and it would be great when it's over if pay scales were recalibrated to appreciate all the people who have continued to work at low or minimum wages, while some non-essentials have sat back and collected bailouts. And, I don't know what we would have done as a community, as a, Sunshine Coast as a nation without these people. And yet, pay-wise, they're certainly not recognized for what they're doing. So I really applaud that aspect of this report was highlighted, and, look forward to working with staff and ticking the boxes in the report card out of this. It was a really great report. I think, it covered a lot of the bases that we were wanting to cover. At this point, I would ask if there are any inquiries from our attendees. I see we have the press and a few of our citizens in the audience.
Thank you, Chair. At this time, I'll ask anybody who has a question of council to please use the raise the hand function found at the bottom of the screen, and we'll turn on your audio and video. And I do have one question here.
Mr. Delaney, welcome.
Hi there. You can hear me okay?
Yes, we can, sir.
Okay. I do actually have a question, and you may not have the answer, but in review of the report and everything else, I'm just curious as to why Habitat for Humanity is not mentioned anywhere. And, they have proven very successful at some of the issues that you're talking about of providing housing for the working poor at a percentage, and they've been very successful. And, especially to Councillor DeAndre's comment, after 13 years, they're really the ones that are successful. And you may not have the answer, but it's an observation. It'd be good to find out why they weren't consulted in the report or credited, and why, they're not there. And the other thing is, when this Franklin Road affordable housing is completed, and you actually have the actual cost of what the project will be for supplying those, you will have a cost per square foot of what it costs to do affordable housing. And, that's going to be a very serious guide on how you make decisions and go forward as well. So that's something that's not going to cost a lot of staff time, but that are just my, main question there.
With respect to the Habitat for Humanity, the town of Gibsons, the regional district, and the district of Seashelt and the Seashelt First Nation funded the report. It was done by an outside consulting firm. I'm not really sure why they didn't reference Habitat for Humanity. I don't know if anyone on staff might be aware that could respond to Mr. Delaney's question. Director Status?
I don't have a good answer for that. I'm not sure why specifically. I mean, we referenced nonprofits and they fall under that category. And there could be more nonprofits that we didn't specifically consult with or send an invitation to consult with. Hopefully we got some of their feedback through the wider consultation and the surveys, but we didn't specifically invite them to a steering committee.
Great, thank you.
A point you brought up, Mr. Delaney, that really is, quite significant, is the cost per square foot of building today. I'm sure Mr. Keck and Mr. Sutton can affirm that those costs have gone up, and particularly exacerbated again by the dreaded word COVID, how it has impacted on the cost of materials. Speaking to a couple of people that I know who have projects, that are being considered, they've recosted them in light of the material costs with COVID, and they've been appalled at their increased cost of materials and how that's going to impact on the cost, even the feasibility of moving forward with that project. So, going back to something we referenced earlier, is there funding under the COVID umbrella that can be applied for to help offset some of these costs, and how they're going to impact on affordable housing, and most specifically, affordable rental housing, because that's a huge thing. Does that answer your question, sir?
Yep. No, that's great. Thank you very much. It was just,
Thank you.
just query. Thank you.
Any other questions from the attendees?
At this time, there are none, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. I would, before I mention our next meeting, I was rather remiss in acknowledging, due to the wonders of Zoom, that this meeting today has been from the territories of both the Squamish and the Seashelts First Nations, and we're very appreciative for our presence here. Currently, the next regular meeting of the Planning and Development Committee has been scheduled for Tuesday, February 9th, 2021. I'm assuming with the pandemic guidelines that are being set by the provincial health minister that we're going to be faced with meeting in this format. Before I ask for a motion for adjournment, is there anything else that anyone would like to bring up or discuss? Seeing none, I will call for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Ladwig, Councillor D'Andretti, thank you. All in favor? Thank you. I'd also like to thank Mr. Keck and Mr. Sutton for joining us today. Some of it probably wasn't as thrilling and exciting for you, but I do really appreciate your comments on the garden suite, and it's definitely an area that I think the community is going to be looking for more of. With that, we'll adjourn this meeting and look forward to seeing you at our next council meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, all.